terror, which differs from the previous wars because it has no foreseeable end, and so we will see creeping compulsion to carry identity cards. The new one will contain huge amounts of information about each holder, coded and accessible to all manner of government servants in a way never previously known.
The new identity cards will be very different from those held by other European citizens. Unlike those in France, our cards will contain biometric data such as fingerprints and eyeball scans. Here, at the National Physical Laboratory, they are already testing the technology that will be used on the proposed identity cards.
Dr. Mansfield, how do you do? So this is the place where you're planning this tremendous step backwards.
By 2008, every applicant for a passport will be compelled to have their retinas scanned, as I'm having mine scanned now.
Please center your eyes in the mirror.
I'm doing as I'm told. Why does it have an American accent?
Because it's made in America.
Ah, I thought as much.
There we are.
Thank you. You have been identified.
Oh, it is not.
It seems likely that within a decade we shall all be forced to carry identity cards at all times. No longer free people, we will be registered like sex offenders or cattle, potential suspects for every offence. The fact that we have not done anything wrong will not stop the state insisting that we account for ourselves.
I understand a driving licence, a permission to drive a dangerous vehicle, but a licence to live. I say that offends my idea of us being born free and equal and presumed innocent.
The government's main argument for identity cards is that they are needed to combat terrorism, but many doubt their effectiveness.
In countries where they have ID cards, there have also been terrorist outrages. Had we had ID cards back in July, when we had the terrorist outrages in London, it's doubtful that they would have prevented those young men from carrying out those attacks.
And even the Lord appointed by the government to examine identity cards is sceptical about how useful they will actually be.
I believe that ID cards might, and I don't think anyone can put it higher than this, might lead to the pre-detection of terrorist acts very occasionally. I'm very much in favour of a voluntary ID card system. I doubt whether one can really make the case that ID cards of a compulsory kind are a proportional response to the terrorism risk.
Once we are forced to present these cards to various forms of authority, we will be leaving a data trail that will give our rulers extraordinary knowledge of what used to be our private lives.
The government wishes to introduce identity cards, initially voluntary, but with the very strong implication they will become compulsory. And it also has been introducing procedures under which an arrested person, not a convicted person, can now be swabbed for DNA and fingerprinted. Isn't there a general tendency in this government to reach for the authoritarian solution when it's faced with crime and disorder and difficulty of any kind?
Above all, this government is extremely keen to ensure that people's basic fundamental human rights are protected. You refer to various things, all of which make the system work in a sensible way, none of them remotely undermining the basic freedoms in this country. And I think your thesis is basically flawed, and I think your thesis is also dangerous because it's crying wolf.
Hasn't it been the case throughout history that countries and governments have never abolished liberty, or very seldom abolished liberty by an act of deliberate destruction, but that what has happened is that people in power have used the excuse, the pretext, or indeed the genuine reason of growing crime and disorder to take away the liberties of everybody rather than just those who are causing the crime and disorder? And oughtn't you to be a bit more careful about this?
I'm sure that you are right, that very few regimes ever abolished liberty just like that, though it might well be in Nazi Germany or somewhere that happened. And you're absolutely right that we've got to be vigilant to ensure that our freedoms are not eroded. But I think your thesis that we're becoming a much more restricted, less free country is completely wrong.
I hope I am wrong. But as George Orwell rightly pointed out, the greatest distinction between the English people and all others has always been our desire to live privately. It is precisely that privacy, that freedom, which is menaced by the changes that this government is pursuing in the name of safety and security. Those changes are growing into a serious threat to those they are meant to protect. People like students, peers of the realm, pensioners, train spotters, chefs, teenagers, and people like you.
Would you sacrifice your civil liberties for more security? Go to our poll on channel4.com/dispatches. Trained killers or a bunch of duffers? Paul gets into the real dad's army next up.